It's always nice being by water, the River Clyde. Just on the other side of the river, that's Tradeston. Before the early 1790s, it didn't exist. Back then, Glasgow was much smaller than it is now. Glasgow was on this side of the river, largely around about the Cross, the High Street, Briggate, and so on and so forth. And the only thing on the other side of the river, by the river, was the Gorbals. But also, where Tradeston is just now, was a strip of land running alongside the river called Windmill Croft. And on it was a windmill. And you can see that windmill in John MacArthur's map of 1778. Well, rarely do I find myself in such grand surroundings. I'm blown away. I should have got dressed up for the occasion. This is the Trades Hall in Glasford Street in Glasgow. It was designed in the early 1790s by Robert Adam and built to house the Glasgow's Trades House, a charitable body that supported the city's tradesmen, the bakers, maltmen, weavers, and so on.
In 1789, just 2 years before Robert Adams started work on the plans for the Glasford Street Trades Hall, the Trades House acquired land on the south of the River Clyde, just west of the Gorbals. That land was called Tradeston. Probably the first mention of the new town or district can be found on a military map dating to 1792. It's a military map because it shows the location of proposed barracks in the Carlton. But south of the river, we can see the word Tradestown pencilled in. That name is actually pencilled in over the Gorbals and was obviously added sometime after 1792. But we can also see that in that year, new streets had been laid out in a regular pattern just south of the old windmill. A new town or district was growing.
By comparing maps, we can see exactly where that windmill used to be. And it was here, just at the end of that strip of land called Windmill Croft. And buildings for the new district would initially have appeared here by the river along regular, neatly laid out streets, and then gradually spread south. And just how far south is hard to say.
On that same 1792 map, you can see the route to Port Glasgow, marked as the road to Greenock. We can also see ships at the Broomielaw, but I suspect those were not large ships and were certainly restricted in movement by low tides. In 1811, the Glasgow, Paisley and Ardrossan Canal opened, which was never completed all the way to Ardrossan. Its terminus was not far away at Port Eglinton, and it's likely that Tradeston's southern boundary sat around there. It would, of course, have been an alternative means of transport to the roads, but only as far as Johnston. It was around the same time that Tradeston was acquired that the men of Glasgow knocked their heads together to try to figure out how to deepen the River Clyde, a transportation route right on their doorstep. Tradeston's eastern boundary was the Gorbals, and on its west sat Kingston, another new town or district developed to take advantage of a riverside location. Indeed, there were a number of new towns, districts, villages, or whatever you want to call them, developed around this time. James Cleland's map of 1832 shows the clear boundaries of these new towns. There's Kingston, Tradeston, Lauriston and Hutchison Town, with the Gorbals stuck right in the middle. While the Gorbals looks quite small in comparison, those larger letters tell us that places like Tradeston and Lauriston were in fact simply part of a larger district called the Gorbals. You can also see the end of the Glasgow, Paisley and Ardrossan Canal at Port Eglinton.
Well, this is Bridge Street, which is in the Gorbals.
Like your show, man.
Thanks very much. I mean, the Gorbals, quite a large area, a parish at one time. But Bridge Street, this is also the dividing line between Tradeston and Lauriston. Everything on that side of the road is Lauriston, and everything on that side of the road is Tradeston. And I wish the sun would decide what it's going to do. Exposures all over the shop.
Glasgow planned to deepen the River Clyde through a combination of dredging and narrowing of the river channel. This was started somewhat half-heartedly in the late 18th century, the same time that Tradeston was created, and it really wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that work started in earnest. Thomas Solman's bird's-eye view of Glasgow in 1864 lets us see the true extent of that transformation with what looks like hundreds of large sailing ships in the very heart of the city. Just a few years later, a new dock would be built at Kingston on the remaining half of Windmill Croft, as we can see in this 1890s map. In 1807, we can see Tradeston starting to grow, with a few buildings on those newly laid out streets between Clyde Street and Nelson Street. But what sort of industries were starting out in the new area? We've already seen some of the trades that come under the Trades House umbrella, like bakers and weavers. Was the plan to export the famous well-fired Glasgow roll all over the world? With the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, It became clear that a lot of intricate equipment would be required to take the place of the men, women and children who were being shown the factory door, and as a consequence we saw an explosion of engine works. Businesses taking advantage of the new age and demand for big metal machines. And so, in places like Tradeston, a lot of engine works appeared.
This is an example of the many engine works that sprang up at Tradeston. It's now housing, but this complex of buildings used to be the Eglinton Engine Works, built in 1855. And they specialised in the manufacture of machinery for the sugar industry. Who'd have thought sugar needed machinery? It's good to see these buildings still standing.
Here they exported massive machines to West Indies plantations, where they were used to crush and knock the bejesus out of sugar cane. I think we all know the name Tate and Lyle, who ultimately owned the plant up until the 1980s. Many of the industrial buildings in Tradeston served a number of functions over the years. They might have started out as engine works, then changed use entirely under different owners. Just over Cook Street is one example. In an 1857 map, we can see an engine works on the West Street corner and a brass foundry closer to Wallace Street, then called Melville Street. Although the building we're looking at just now has a similar footprint to that shown in the map, it's not the same building. It was apparently built in 1900, although for a long time I wondered if it was earlier, and a part of me still thinks it is. As I say, these buildings changed owners and use over time. This side-by-side image shows the 1857 map on the left and an 1890s map on the right. You can see that the engine works and brass foundry have gone in the later map, and new businesses have appeared. The Glasgow Copper Works, the Clydesdale Paint, Colour and Oil Works, and the Tradeston Paint Mills. This early 20th century advert shows the building on the corner. Apparently the tall tower housed a water tank linked to a sprinkler system and fire control, which was important given the flammable nature of the wares. If we move further down Tradeston Street, we can see how the Glasgow Copper Works building looks today.
Many of Tradeston's old industrial buildings still survive, although in passing you maybe wouldn't realise what they were once used for. Many of them were hidden under the modern facade of some sort of clothes retail shop or a restaurant or whatever. But if you just really look as you wander around, you'll also see little clues or leftovers of the community that once lived and worked in this area. Like this school. Somebody's had a bit of an accident here and ploughed into this wall and destroyed it. But this is the gate here. Stone pillars once a gate to the school here. All you have to do is look, you see stuff like this. And of course, just on the other side of the road, you've got the old fire station. No longer a fire station, but it's a rather grand and a pretty big building. It was a major fire station in its day. for some reason I've been strangely fascinated by this particular part of Tradeston, and especially this white brick building, and also another building just behind it, a kind of tall building with a rather strange, tiny, cottage-shaped structure at the top. Every time I look at it, I think, what did that used to be? I can't remember if I've already said, but that many of the industrial buildings in Tradeston do still survive. You know, most are not, they don't really have any architectural features to shout about. Most of these buildings are just brick buildings. And of course the question is, what did these buildings used to be?
By comparing old maps with modern satellite images, we can pinpoint the exact location of that white brick building. In the 1890s, it was a brass foundry. And from various angles, we can glimpse that strange tall building. There. Today, that building is Grain Store Studios, which is a big clue. Seemingly, when they constructed the creative workspace which is used by artists and designers, there was talk of hatches in the floors and ceilings at each level, and it all pointed towards an earlier life as a grain store. That tiny cottage-shaped structure at the top is likely to have been part of a bucket mechanism that moved grain from one floor to another. You can see another example of such a structure at the top of this tall grain store in Centre Street, captured in 1966 by John R. Hume. Grain Store Studios is a perfect example of what can be done with an old industrial building that on the surface has few architectural features of note, but can be saved to preserve the feel, not to mention the industrial heritage of an area. To breathe life back into in a unique and utterly inspiring way has to be applauded. We only have to walk a short distance further down Tradeston Street to find a nondescript building with no windows. But if we look, there's a hidden arched doorway behind that modern covering. Again, an 1890s map tells us that the building was once a mission hall. We can in fact see this mission hall in a photo by John R. Hume dating to 1968. The Paddy Black Memorial Mission. Paddy Black was a social reformer and minister who dedicated his life to helping the poor in Glasgow. Before becoming a mission hall, that building, like so many in Tradeston, was a grain store.
In Tradeston there were just as many grain stores and flour mills as there were engine works. And you can see the Tradeston, the flour mill, in this 1857 map.
You wouldn't think flour was dangerous, but in 1872 that flour mill exploded. The walls of the building blew out spectacularly, damaging nearby properties and windows in Bridge Street railway station. Almost every fireman in the city was called out to attend, and what was described as the worst explosion the city had ever seen. 18 people died. It was a hard lesson to learn about the explosive properties of flour dust. The middle of the 20th century saw the start of a terminal decline in use of the River Clyde. Other means of transport were now available. There was competition from abroad in shipbuilding and other industries, and it was now no longer viable to constantly dredge a river that was simply unable to cope with the increasing size of ships. And so, like Anderson on the other side of the Clyde, gradually, one by one, the industries closed down and moved out, and Tradeston died. In 2018, financial institution Barclays started work on a state-of-the-art riverside campus at Tradeston. It was a development that would incorporate some of Tradeston's old buildings and give a real nod of acknowledgement to the past. But not only that, the thought and attention to detail that has been put into not just the retention of old structures, but the appearance of modern buildings is quite astonishing. Modern buildings of different size, shape and colour, and intriguing areas that you just want to explore. The designers and architects who created this really need to be recognised.
Often in these videos I have a go at modern architecture. For good reason. Just on far too many occasions it's bland and uninteresting. And as someone else commented in one of my other videos, he described modern architecture often equating it with cliffs with windows, which pretty much sums it up. It's a very good phrase, cliffs with windows, modern architecture. This is not one of those occasions, because that behind me is something very, very special. The building part of the complex, way in the far corner, is called Windmill Croft, which takes us right back to the very beginning, that windmill on the grassy banks of the River Clyde. I'm Eddie Burns, take care.